James Thornton stood at the edge of the glittering ballroom, his eyes scanning the crowd of New York's elite. The annual Thornton Foundation Gala was in full swing, champagne flowing freely as the rich and famous mingled, their laughter echoing off the ornate walls. But James felt none of the joy that filled the room. For him, this night, like every night for the past 15 years, was tinged with an undercurrent of grief. He absently swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, the ice clinking softly against the glass. At 55, James cut an impressive figure in his tailored tuxedo, his salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes giving him an air of distinguished elegance. To the outside world, he was the epitome of success, a self-made billionaire with a golden touch in real estate. But those who knew him well could see the shadows that lurked behind his smile, the weight of loss that he carried on his. As he made his way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and small talk with practiced ease, James's mind wandered to the reason behind this lavish affair. The Thornton Foundation, established in memory of his daughter Emily, who had vanished without a trace 15 years ago at the tender age of 8. The pain of that loss still felt as fresh as the day it happened, a gaping wound in his heart that refused to heal. "James, darling," a shrill voice cut through his reverie. "You simply must meet the Andersons. They've just made the most generous donation to the foundation." Plastering on his best society smile, James turned to face Vivian Holbrook, the gala's organizer and one of New York's most notorious socialites. Her bejeweled hand clutched his arm as she steered him towards a couple standing near the bar. "Of course, Vivian. Lead the way," James replied, his voice a practiced blend of charm and authority. As they weaved through the sea of designer gowns and tuxedos, James's gaze drifted across the room. And then, in a moment that would forever change the course of his life, he saw her. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as his eyes locked onto a young woman standing by the grand staircase. She was laughing, her head thrown back in genuine mirth, long chestnut hair cascading down her back. But it wasn't her beauty that made James's heart stutter in his chest. It was her face, a face he would recognize anywhere, a face he saw every night in his dreams. Emily. The crystal tumbler slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was lost in the din of the party, but for James, it was as if a bomb had exploded. He stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to think. It couldn't be. It was impossible. And yet, James, are you all right? Vivian's concerned voice barely registered as he stared at the young woman, drinking in every detail of her features. She looked exactly as he had imagined Emily would at 23, the same delicate nose, the same high cheekbones, even the small dimple in her left cheek when she smiled. It was like seeing a ghost, a miracle made flesh and blood. Without a word to Vivian, James began moving through the crowd, his eyes never leaving the young woman. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out the music and chatter around him. As he drew closer, he could see her eyes, the same striking green as Emily's, as his late wife's. He was mere feet away when she turned, sensing his approach. Their eyes met, and James felt the world tilt on its axis. He opened his mouth, Emily's name on the tip of his tongue, when... "Oh, I'm so sorry. Did you need something?" Her voice, light and melodious, hit him like a physical blow. There was no recognition in those familiar green eyes, no spark of the little girl he had lost. She looked at him with polite curiosity, nothing more. James struggled to find his voice, his mind reeling. I'm sorry," he managed to croak out. You remind me of someone." The young woman's expression softened with sympathy. "Oh, I see. I hope it's a good someone," she said with a gentle laugh. "The best," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm James Thornton. And you are?" "Sarah," she replied, extending her hand. "Sarah Collier. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thornton. This is an amazing event you've put together." James took her hand, noting how small and delicate it felt in his own, just like Emily's had been. "Thank you, Sarah. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. Are you here with family?" A flicker of something, sadness, uncertainty, passed over Sarah's face before she smiled again. "No, I'm here with friends. We volunteer at one of the shelters your foundation supports." It's truly inspiring work you're doing. James nodded absently, his mind racing. He couldn't take his eyes off her face, searching for any sign, any hint that she might be his long-lost daughter. But there was nothing, no flash of recognition, no hidden knowledge behind those familiar eyes. "Mr. Thornton, are you sure you're all right?" Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice. Realizing he had been staring, James shook himself. Yes, I'm fine. I'm sorry, Sarah. You look so much like someone I used to know. It's quite remarkable, actually. Sarah's brow furrowed slightly. I hope it's not bringing up painful memories for you. No, not at all. James lied smoothly, years of boardroom negotiations coming to his aid. In fact, I'd love to hear more about your volunteer work. Perhaps we could chat somewhere a bit quieter? As Sarah nodded and allowed James to guide her towards a less crowded area of the ballroom, his mind was already spinning with possibilities. He needed to know more about this young woman who looked so impossibly like his Emily. Where did she come from? Who were her parents? And why did she have no memory of him? James Thornton, a man who had built an empire on calculated risks and iron control, felt the foundations of his world shifting beneath his feet. He didn't know if Sarah Collier was truly his daughter, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would move heaven and earth to uncover the truth. As they found a quiet corner and began to talk, James's keen mind was already formulating a plan. He would solve this mystery, no matter the cost. And if, by some miracle, this young woman truly was his Emily, well, he would make up for every second of the 15 years they had lost. The gala continued around them, a swirl of lights and laughter, but for James Thornton, the world had narrowed to this moment, this conversation. His journey to uncover the truth was just beginning, and he had no idea of the storms that lay ahead, storms that would test his resolve, challenge his beliefs, and ultimately, change his life forever. The days following the gala passed in a blur for James Thornton. He found himself unable to focus on work, his mind constantly drifting back to Sarah Collier's face. A face so hauntingly familiar it made his heart ache. He had managed to keep his composure during their conversation at the gala, carefully extracting information while trying not to appear too eager or suspicious. Sarah, he learned, was a recent college graduate working as a social worker in one of New York's rougher neighborhoods. She had a passion for helping underprivileged children, which was what had drawn her to volunteer at the shelter supported by the Thornton Foundation. As she spoke about her work, James could see the same fire, the same determination that had always burned in Emily's eyes. But it was what Sarah didn't say that intrigued James the most. When he had casually inquired about her family, a shadow had passed over her face. I don't really have much family," she had said hesitantly. "I grew up in foster care. It's part of why I became a social worker. I want to help kids who are in the same situation I was." Those words had sent James's mind reeling. Could it be possible? Could Sarah have been taken as a child, her memories somehow erased or suppressed? The idea seemed far-fetched, like something out of a movie, but James couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Sarah's story than met the eye. Now, sitting in his penthouse office overlooking Central Park, James stared at the file his private investigator had compiled on Sarah Collier. It was frustratingly thin, a birth certificate showing she had been born in a small town in Ohio, records of her moving through various foster homes, her academic achievements. But there was a glaring hole in the information: nothing before the age of 9. James ran a hand through his silver hair, his mind working overtime. He had spent the last 15 years searching for Emily, following every lead, no matter how small. He had hired the best private investigators, offered rewards, even consulted with psychics in moments of desperation. And now, just when he had started to lose hope, this young woman had appeared, like a miracle. But James was a businessman, a man who dealt in facts and figures. He couldn't allow himself to be carried away by emotion or wishful thinking. He needed proof. With a determined set to his jaw, James picked up his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Detective Ramirez? It's James Thornton. I need your help with something. Off the books." An hour later, James sat across from Maria Ramirez in a quiet corner of his favorite restaurant. The detective had been in charge of Emily's case all those years ago, and though she had officially retired from the force, she had never stopped looking for leads. "James, are you sure about this?" Maria asked, her dark eyes filled with concern. "I know how much you want to find Emily, but chasing after every girl who bears a resemblance, it's only going to bring you more pain." James leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "Maria, you don't understand. This isn't just a resemblance. It's like looking at a photograph of Emily, grown up. And there are other things, her mannerisms, the way she speaks. It's uncanny." Maria sighed, running a hand through her salt and pepper hair. "All right, tell me everything you know about this Sarah Collier." As James relayed the information he had gathered, he could see the skepticism in Maria's eyes slowly give way to curiosity. By the time he finished, she was leaning forward, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I have to admit, it's intriguing," she said slowly. "The age matches up, and the lack of records before age 9. It could be coincidence, but it's worth looking into." "So you'll help me?" James asked, hope surging in his chest. Maria fixed him with a stern look. "I'll look into it, James. But you have to promise me something. Don't approach this girl again until we know more. If she is Emily, and if something traumatic happened to her, pushing too hard could do more harm than good. And if she's not, well, you don't want to get entangled in a potential lawsuit." James nodded reluctantly. He knew Maria was right, but the thought of sitting back and doing nothing was almost unbearable. "All right, I promise. But please, Maria, work quickly. I need to know." As they parted ways, James felt a mixture of hope and anxiety churning in his gut. He wanted so desperately to believe that Sarah was Emily, but he was also terrified of having his hopes dashed once again. Over the next few weeks, James threw himself into his work, trying to distract himself from the constant thoughts of Sarah. He expanded the Thornton Foundation's reach, funding new shelters and educational programs across the city. And if some of those programs happened to be in Sarah's neighborhood, well, that was just a coincidence. It was during a visit to one of these new shelters that fate intervened once again. James was touring the facility, nodding and smiling as the director showed him around, when a familiar voice reached his ears. "Mr. Thornton? What a surprise to see you here." James turned to see Sarah Collier standing in the doorway of a classroom, a group of children peering curiously around her legs. His heart leapt at the sight of her, and he had to remind himself of his promise to Maria. "Sarah, hello," he said, striving for a casual tone. "I was just touring the new facilities. I didn't realize you worked here." Sarah's face lit up with a smile that was painfully familiar. "Oh, I don't work here officially. I'm just volunteering today. But isn't it wonderful what the foundation is doing? These kids are going to have so many more opportunities now." As Sarah spoke, one of the children tugged at her sleeve. "Miss Sarah, who's the old man?" the little girl stage whispered, causing Sarah to laugh. "Lily, that's not very polite," Sarah gently admonished. "This is Mr. Thornton. He's the one who made it possible for us to have all these nice new things." Sarah blushed, looking mortified, but James found himself chuckling. "Yes, Lily, I suppose I am," he said, crouching down to the child's level. "But you know what? I think you're much richer than I am." The little girl's eyes widened. "Is he rich?" she asked in that direct way only children can. Lily looked confused. "But I don't have any money." James smiled softly. "Money isn't everything, Lily. You have Miss Sarah here to teach you and care for you. That makes you very rich indeed." As he straightened up, James caught Sarah looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between surprise and admiration. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine that this was how things should be, him and Emily, working together to help children in need. "Mr. Thornton," Sarah said hesitantly, "I hope you don't think this is too forward, but would you like to join us? The kids are about to have their art lesson, and I'm sure they'd love to show you their work." James knew he should decline. He knew he should keep his distance until Maria had completed her investigation. But looking into Sarah's hopeful green eyes, Emily's eyes, he found he couldn't refuse. "I'd be honored," he said, his heart swelling as Sarah's face broke into a radiant smile. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of laughter, paint, and childish chatter. James found himself swept up in the children's enthusiasm, praising their artwork and answering their endless questions. But his eyes kept being drawn back to Sarah, watching the gentle way she interacted with the kids, the patience and kindness she showed. As the lesson came to an end and the children began to clean up, Sarah approached James, a tentative smile on her face. "Thank you for staying," she said softly. "The kids loved having you here. You're not at all what I expected." James raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and what did you expect?" Sarah blushed slightly. "I don't know. I guess I thought someone in your position would be more distant. Aloof. But you're so good with the kids. It's clear you really care." James felt a lump form in his throat. If only she knew how much he cared, how much he had lost. "These children remind me of my daughter," he found himself saying, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Sarah's expression softened with sympathy. "Your daughter? I didn't know you had children." For a moment, James was tempted to tell her everything, about Emily, about the years of searching, about the uncanny resemblance that had haunted him since the night of the gala. But Maria's warning echoed in his mind, and he held back. "I had a daughter," he said instead, his voice thick with emotion. She passed away many years ago." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh, Mr. Thornton, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." James managed a sad smile. "It's all right. It was a long time ago. But it's why the Foundation's work is so important to me. Every child deserves a chance at a happy, healthy life." Sarah nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "I understand. And I think it's beautiful, what you've created in her memory." As they stood there, surrounded by children's artwork and the chaos of cleanup, James felt a connection to Sarah that went beyond her resemblance to Emily. There was a kindness in her, a genuine desire to help others, that resonated with something deep inside him. But even as he basked in the warmth of that connection, a part of him couldn't help but wonder, was this feeling familiar because Sarah truly was Emily? Or was he simply projecting his hopes and memories onto this young woman who bore such a striking resemblance to his lost daughter? The question gnawed at him as he said his goodbyes and left the shelter. He knew he was walking a dangerous line, getting emotionally involved before he had any concrete answers. But how could he not? Every interaction with Sarah only deepened his conviction that there was more to her story than met the eye. As James climbed into the back of his waiting car, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from Maria Ramirez. "Found something. Meet me tomorrow, 9 a.m., usual place." James stared at the message, his heart racing. This could be it, the answer he had been searching for all these years. But as the car pulled away from the curb, he found himself looking back at the shelter, where he could see Sarah waving goodbye to the last of the children. Whatever Maria had discovered, whatever truth lay ahead, James knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same again. The following morning dawned gray and misty, a fitting backdrop for the tumultuous emotions swirling within James Thornton. He sat in a quiet corner booth of a nondescript diner, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, waiting for Maria Ramirez to arrive. His night had been restless, filled with dreams of Emily and Sarah, their faces blurring together in a confusing montage of hope and loss. The bell above the diner's door jingled, and James looked up to see Maria striding towards him, a thick manila envelope tucked under her arm. The retired detective slid into the booth across from him, her face unreadable. "James," she greeted him with a nod, signaling the waitress for coffee. "Maria," James replied, his voice tight with anticipation. "What did you find?" Maria took a deep breath, her fingers drumming on the envelope. "Before I show you this, I need you to understand something. What I've uncovered, it's complicated. And it might not be what you want to hear." James felt his heart clench, but he steeled himself. "I understand. Please, Maria, I need to know." With a nod, Maria opened the envelope and spread several documents on the table between them. "I started by looking into Sarah Collier's background, as we discussed. What I found was, well, inconsistent at best." She pointed to a birth certificate. "This is the birth certificate on file for Sarah Collier. Born in Lima, Ohio, to Margaret and Thomas Collier. But when I dug deeper, I found something strange. Maria pulled out another document, this one older and more worn. This is a death certificate for a Sarah Collier, born on the same day, in the same town, to the same parents. According to this, Sarah Collier died at the age of 3 from complications of pneumonia. James felt his head spin. But, how is that possible? That's what I wanted to know, Maria continued. So I kept digging. I managed to track down Margaret Collier. She's living in a nursing home in Florida now. Thomas passed away a few years ago. She paused, taking a sip of her coffee before continuing. I spoke with Margaret, James. She confirmed that her daughter Sarah died as a toddler. She had never heard of the Sarah Collier we know. James felt a glimmer of hope. So the Sarah we know, she could be Emily? Using a false identity? Maria held up a hand, her expression grave. It's not that simple. I also looked into the foster care records Sarah talked about. They exist, James. There are documents, caseworker reports, school records, all pointing to a Sarah Collier growing up in the system. But here's where it gets strange. The earliest of these records only go back to when she was 9 years old. Before that, there's nothing. James leaned back in his seat, his mind reeling. So what are you saying, Maria? Who is she? Maria sighed, rubbing her temples. I don't know, James. The identity she's using belonged to a child who died years ago. But someone has gone to great lengths to create a paper trail for this Sarah Collier. School records, medical history, even a social security number, it's all there, but it all starts when she was 9. The same age Emily was when she disappeared, James whispered, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. Maria nodded solemnly. Yes. And there's more. I managed to get access to some sealed records from around the time Emily vanished. There were other cases, James. Other children who went missing around the same time, in the same region. She pulled out a series of photographs, school pictures of smiling children, alongside grim-faced police officers holding missing posters. Most of these cases were never solved. The children were never found. James felt sick to his stomach as he looked at the faces of the missing children. Each one represented a family torn apart, a loss as deep and painful as his own. You think they're connected to Emily's disappearance? I think it's a possibility we can't ignore, Maria said carefully. There were rumors back then, whispers of an organized group involved in child trafficking. But we could never find any concrete evidence. James's mind was racing, connecting dots he had never seen before. And you think Sarah, Emily, might have been one of their victims? Maria's expression softened with sympathy. It's a theory, James. One that would explain the gaps in Sarah's history, her lack of memories before age 9. But we need to be careful here. We don't have proof that Sarah is Emily, or that she was involved in any of this. And if she was a victim of trafficking, approaching her with this information could be incredibly traumatic. James nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of this new information. So what do we do now? Now, Maria said, gathering up the documents, we keep digging. I have some contacts in the FBI who might be able to shed more light on these old cases. And you, James, need to be very careful in your interactions with Sarah. If she is Emily, if she has been through something traumatic, we need to approach this delicately. As they left the diner, James felt as though he was walking in a daze. The possibility that Emily might be alive, that she might have suffered unimaginable horrors, was almost too much to bear. And yet, a small part of him clung to hope. Hope that he might finally have found his daughter, that he might have a chance to make things right. Over the next few weeks, James threw himself into his work with a fervor that surprised even his closest associates. He expanded the Thornton Foundation's efforts, focusing particularly on programs to combat child trafficking and support survivors. If anyone noticed that many of these new initiatives were centered in Sarah's neighborhood, they didn't comment on it. James also found himself seeking out opportunities to interact with Sarah, always under the guise of foundation business. Each encounter left him more convinced than ever that she was somehow connected to Emily. It wasn't just her appearance, it was the little things, like the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, or her infectious laugh that could light up a room. But there were moments, too, when James caught glimpses of something darker. Sometimes, when Sarah thought no one was looking, a shadow would pass over her face, a haunted look that spoke of hidden pain. In those moments, James had to fight the urge to take her in his arms, to tell her that everything would be all right, that he would protect her from whatever ghosts were chasing her. It was during one of these foundation events that things came to a head. James was giving a speech about the importance of protecting vulnerable children when he noticed Sarah slip out of the room, her face pale and drawn. Without thinking, he cut his speech short and followed her. He found her in a quiet corridor, leaning against the wall with her eyes closed, taking deep, shuddering breaths. "Sarah," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you all right?" Sarah's eyes flew open, and for a moment, just a fleeting second, James saw a flash of recognition, of fear, in her gaze. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a forced smile. "Mr. Thornton, I'm so sorry, I just needed some air. Your speech was very moving." James stepped closer, concern etched on his face. "Sarah, please. If something's wrong, if you need help." "I'm fine," Sarah interrupted, her voice sharper than he had ever heard it. "Really, Mr. Thornton, you don't need to worry about me." But as she tried to step around him, Sarah stumbled, her knees buckling. James caught her instinctively, supporting her weight as she sagged against him. "Sarah," he exclaimed, his heart racing. "What's wrong? Should I call a doctor?" Sarah shook her head weakly, her face ashen. No, doctor, please. I need to sit down." James helped her to a nearby bench, his arms still around her shoulders. As they sat, he couldn't help but notice how right it felt to hold her, how familiar her weight felt against him. It was like muscle memory, like comforting Emily after a nightmare. "Sarah," he said gently, "I know we haven't known each other long, but I hope you know you can trust me. If you're in some kind of trouble." Sarah looked up at him, her green eyes brimming with tears. "Mr. Thornton, James, you don't understand. I can't. I don't." She trailed off, her body beginning to shake with silent sobs. Without thinking, James pulled her closer, stroking her hair as he had done for Emily 1,000 times before. "Shush, it's all right," he murmured. "You're safe. I've got you." As he held her, James felt a surge of protectiveness unlike anything he had experienced since Emily's disappearance. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that he would do anything to keep Sarah safe, to uncover the truth of her past, whether she turned out to be Emily or not. Slowly, Sarah's sobs subsided, and she pulled away, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know what came over me. Your speech, about those children, it just hit me hard, I guess." James nodded, not pushing for more. "It's a difficult subject. Sarah, I hope you know that if you ever need anything at all, you can come to me." Sarah gave him a watery smile. "You're very kind, Mr. Thornton. I don't know why you've taken such an interest in me, but thank you." As they made their way back to the event, James's mind was racing. Something had triggered Sarah's breakdown. Was it possible that his words had stirred some buried memory? And that look in her eyes when he had first approached her, it had been so familiar, so much like Emily in the moments before she would throw herself into his arms after a long day at work. Later that night, as James sat in his study nursing a glass of scotch, his phone buzzed with a message from Maria. "Need to meet. New information. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., your office." James stared at the message, a mixture of hope and dread swirling in his chest. Whatever Maria had uncovered, he knew it would change everything. As he looked out over the twinkling lights of the city, James made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth about Sarah's past, about Emily's disappearance. And no matter what that truth turned out to be, he would protect her with every ounce of his considerable power and wealth. Little did James know that across the city, in a small apartment cluttered with children's artwork and social work textbooks, Sarah Collier was curled up on her couch, tears streaming down her face as fragmented memories flashed through her mind. Memories of a life she had thought long forgotten, of a family she had been told never existed. As the night deepened, both James and Sarah lay awake, each grappling with the weight of secrets and the possibility of a truth that could reshape their worlds. The stage was set for revelations that would test the limits of love, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter. The following afternoon, James sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, his fingers drumming an impatient rhythm as he waited for Maria to arrive. The events of the previous night had left him feeling raw and vulnerable, his emotions oscillating between hope and fear with dizzying speed. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his reverie. "Come in," he called, straightening in his chair as Maria entered, her face grave. "James," she greeted him, taking a seat across from him. "Thank you for meeting me on such short notice." "Of course," James replied, leaning forward. "What have you found?" Maria took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "I've been in touch with my FBI contact. They've reopened several cold cases related to child disappearances in the late 90s and early 2000s, including Emily's." James felt his heart rate quicken. "And? They've uncovered evidence of a sophisticated trafficking ring operating during that time," Maria continued. "The organization was involved in kidnapping children and repurposing them, for lack of a better term. New identities, new families, sometimes even new countries." James felt the blood drain from his face. "Are you saying Emily might have been?" Maria nodded solemnly. "It's a possibility we have to consider. The mo fits with what we know about Sarah's background, the false identity, the lack of records before a certain age." "But why?" James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why take children and give them new lives instead of, I don't know, ransoming them back to their families?" Maria's expression darkened. "From what my contact told me, it wasn't about money, at least, not directly. It was about power, influence. These children were placed with wealthy, influential families who couldn't have children of their own. Families who would do anything, pay any price, to keep their new children, and prevent the truth from coming out." James felt sick to his stomach. The idea that Emily, his sweet, innocent Emily, might have been caught up in such a horrific scheme was almost too much to bear. And yet, a small part of him clung to hope. If this was true, it meant she might still be alive. "What about Sarah?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Do they have any information on her specifically?" Maria shook her head. "Not yet, but they're looking into it. James, I have to warn you, if Sarah is involved in this, if she is Emily, approaching her directly could be incredibly dangerous. Not just for her, but for you as well. These people, whoever they are, have gone to great lengths to keep this operation hidden. They won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens to expose them." James nodded, his jaw set in determination. "I understand the risks, Maria. But I can't just sit back and do nothing. Not when I'm so close to finding out the truth." Maria sighed, a look of resignation crossing her face. "I thought you might say that. Which is why I've arranged for some additional security for you. Discreet, but effective. And I want you to promise me you won't confront Sarah or anyone else without talking to me first. We need to tread very carefully here." As Maria left his office, James felt a storm of emotions raging within him. The possibility that Emily might be alive, that she might have been living as Sarah all these years, filled him with a wild, desperate hope. But the thought of what she might have endured, of the trauma she might have suffered, made him want to weep. Over the next few days, James found himself watching Sarah more closely than ever. He noticed things he had overlooked before, the way she sometimes flinched at sudden noises, the haunted look that occasionally flashed across her face when she thought no one was watching. Were these signs of a traumatic past, or was he simply seeing what he wanted to see? It was during a foundation event at a local community center that things came to a head. James was chatting with some donors when he noticed Sarah slip away from the crowd, heading towards a quiet corridor. Without thinking, he excused himself and followed her. He found her standing in front of a wall of children's artwork, her fingers tracing the outline of a crayon drawing. As he approached, he could see that her shoulders were shaking slightly. "Sarah," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, quickly wiping her eyes. "Mr. Thornton, I'm sorry, I just needed a moment." James stepped closer, his heart aching at the pain evident in her eyes. Sarah, please. I know something's troubling you. I want to help, if you'll let me. For a long moment, Sarah just stared at him, her green eyes, Emily's eyes, searching his face as if looking for something. Then, to James's surprise, she broke down completely. I don't know who I am, she sobbed, her words tumbling out in a rush. I have these memories, these flashes of a life I don't recognize. A family I don't remember. And I'm so scared. Without hesitation, James pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. It felt so right, so familiar, that he had to fight back tears of his own. It's okay, he murmured, stroking her hair. You're safe. I've got you. As Sarah's sobs subsided, she pulled back slightly, looking up at James with a mixture of confusion and something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. Why do I feel like I know you? She whispered. Not just from the foundation, but from before. It doesn't make any sense. James's heart was pounding so hard he was sure Sarah must be able to hear it. This was the moment he had been waiting for, dreading, and hoping for all at once. He knew he should wait, should talk to Maria before saying anything. But looking into Sarah's eyes, seeing the pain and confusion there, he couldn't bring himself to stay silent. Sarah, he said gently, I think I might know why you're having these memories. But I need you to listen to me carefully, okay? What I'm about to tell you might be difficult to hear. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide and fearful. James took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to say. 15 years ago, I had a daughter named Emily. She was 8 years old when she disappeared without a trace. We searched for her for years, but we never found her. Until what? Sarah whispered, her face pale. Until I saw you at the gala, James continued, his voice thick with emotion. Sarah, you look exactly like Emily would if she had grown up. You have her eyes, her smile, even the little dimple in your left cheek when you laugh. Sarah took a step back, shaking her head. No, that's impossible. I grew up in foster care. I have records, I have. A life that only started when you were 9, James finished gently. Sarah, I've had people looking into your background. There are inconsistencies, things that don't add up. Sarah's eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape. This is crazy. You're saying, what? That I'm your long-lost daughter? That my entire life is a lie? James reached out to her, but she flinched away. I know it sounds impossible. But Sarah, think about those memories you mentioned. The family you don't recognize. What if those aren't just dreams or imagination? What if they're real memories trying to break through? For a moment, Sarah looked like she might bolt. But then something in her expression changed, a look of dawning realization spreading across her face. The house, she whispered. In my dreams, there's always this house. Big, white, with a red door and a tire swing in the front yard. I always thought it was just something I made up, but it's real, James said, his voice cracking. It's our house, Emily. Your house. Sarah, Emily? Staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. This can't be happening. It can't be true. James wanted nothing more than to pull her into his arms again, to tell her that everything would be all right. But he knew he had to tread carefully. If Sarah really was Emily, if she had been through the trauma of kidnapping and having her identity erased, pushing too hard could do irreparable damage. I know this is a lot to take in, he said softly. And I know you have no reason to trust me. But Sarah, Emily, I want to help you uncover the truth. Whatever that truth might be. Will you let me? Sarah looked at him, her eyes swimming with tears and confusion. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. I don't know if I believe any of this, she said, her voice trembling. But these memories, these feelings I've been having. I need to know where they're coming from. I need to know who I really am. James felt a surge of hope so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. We'll figure this out together, he promised. I have people who can help us, safely, discreetly. We'll take it as slowly as you need. As they stood there in the quiet corridor, surrounded by children's artwork, James felt as though he was standing on the precipice of something monumental. If Sarah really was Emily, if he had finally found his long-lost daughter after all these years, it would be nothing short of a miracle. But even as hope bloomed in his chest, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning. The people who had taken Emily, who had erased her identity and given her a new life, they were still out there. And if they discovered that Sarah was starting to remember, that the truth of their operation might come to light. James pushed the thought aside. He would protect Sarah, Emily, with everything he had. No matter what it took, no matter what dangers they might face, he would keep her safe and help her uncover the truth of her past. As they made their way back to the event, James noticed Sarah. He couldn't bring himself to think of her as Emily just yet, casting furtive glances at him, as if seeing him for the first time. He wondered what was going through her mind, what fragments of memory might be stirring beneath the surface. Later that night, as James sat in his study nursing a glass of scotch, his phone buzzed with a message. His heart leapt when he saw it was from Sarah. "I can't stop thinking about what you told me. I have so many questions. Can we meet tomorrow, somewhere private?" James quickly typed out a reply, suggesting a quiet cafe he knew where they could talk without fear of being overheard. As he set his phone down, he felt a mixture of elation and trepidation. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for, hoping for 15 long years. But even as he allowed himself to imagine a future with Emily back in his life, James couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into dangerous territory. The people behind Emily's disappearance, the organization that had stolen her and so many other children, they were still out there. And if they discovered that Sarah was starting to remember, that the truth of their operation might come to light. James shook his head, pushing the dark thoughts aside. He would protect Sarah, Emily, with everything he had. No matter what it took, no matter what dangers they might face, he would keep her safe and help her uncover the truth of her past. As he gazed out at the twinkling lights of the city, James made a silent vow. He would reunite his family, heal the wounds of the past, and bring those responsible for Emily's kidnapping to justice. The road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but for the first time in 15 years, James felt a glimmer of true hope. Little did he know that across the city, in her small apartment, Sarah was curled up on her couch, tears streaming down her face as she looked at old photographs she had found hidden in the back of her closet. Photos of a life she didn't remember, of a family she had been told never existed. And as she traced the outline of a smiling man's face, a face that looked so much like an older version of James Thornton, she felt something deep inside her begin to shift and change. The truth was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. And it would change everything. The following morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the tumultuous emotions swirling within both James and Sarah. They had agreed to meet at a small, out-of-the-way cafe that James frequented when he needed to escape the pressures of his high-profile life. James arrived early, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. He had spent a sleepless night wrestling with the implications of what he was about to do. By sharing his suspicions with Sarah, he had set in motion a chain of events that could either reunite him with his long-lost daughter or shatter both their lives beyond repair. He was on his second cup of coffee when Sarah walked in, her face pale and drawn. She looked as if she hadn't slept either, dark circles shadowing her eyes. As she slid into the booth across from him, James had to resist the urge to reach out and comfort her as he would have done with Emily all those years ago. "Sarah," he greeted her softly. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, her eyes darting nervously around the cafe before settling on him. I don't know where to start," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. James took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. "Why don't you tell me about those photographs you mentioned in your message? The ones you found in your closet?" Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she reached into her bag, pulling out a small stack of worn photos. She laid them on the table between them, and James felt his breath catch in his throat. There, smiling up at him, was Emily, his Emily, at various ages. A toddler blowing out birthday candles, a gap-toothed 6-year-old holding up a fish she'd caught, an 8-year-old beaming in her school picture. And in many of the photos, James saw himself, younger, less gray, but unmistakably him. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "These photos, that's me. But I don't remember any of this. And that man, she pointed to James in one of the pictures, that's you, isn't it? But younger. James nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of his eyes. Yes, he said softly. That's me. And that little girl. That's Emily. My Emily. Sarah's eyes widened, a look of confusion and dawning realization crossing her face. But if that's me, and that's you, then... She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Then you might be Emily, James finished gently. My daughter who disappeared 15 years ago. For a long moment, Sarah said nothing, her eyes fixed on the photographs spread out before her. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I've been having dreams, she said. Nightmares, really. About a house, a family, and then darkness. Being taken. I always thought they were just dreams, but... James leaned forward, his heart racing. Sarah, I know this is overwhelming. But I think it's possible that those aren't just dreams. They might be memories, real memories, trying to break through. Sarah looked up at him, her green eyes, Emily's eyes, swimming with tears. How is this possible? How could I forget my entire life? My family? James sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. I've been working with some people, investigators, experts in child abduction cases. They believe you might have been taken by an organization that specialized in stealing children and giving them new identities. He watched as Sarah's face paled even further, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh God, she whispered. The gaps in my memory, the nightmares. It all makes a horrible kind of sense. James wanted nothing more than to reach across the table and pull her into his arms, to tell her that everything would be all right. But he knew he had to tread carefully. If Sarah really was Emily, if she had been through the trauma of kidnapping and having her identity erased, pushing too hard could do irreparable damage. Sarah, he said gently, I know this is a lot to take in. And I want you to know that you're under no obligation to do anything you're not comfortable with. If you want to walk away right now and forget this conversation ever happened, I'll understand. Sarah shook her head, a look of determination settling over her features. No, she said firmly. I need to know the truth. I've spent my whole life feeling like something was missing, like I didn't quite fit in my own skin. If there's even a chance that what you're saying is true. She trailed off, her eyes meeting James's with a mixture of fear and hope. What do we do now? She asked. James took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. If you're willing, there are tests we can do. DNA tests that can prove whether or not you're Emily. And I know people who can help us dig deeper into your past, to try and uncover what really happened to you. Sarah nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the outline of her younger self in one of the photographs. Okay, she said softly. Let's do it. Let's find out the truth. As they left the cafe, James felt a mixture of elation and trepidation. They were one step closer to uncovering the truth, to potentially reuniting after 15 long years of separation. But he also knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. James arranged for discreet DNA testing, the results of which would take some time to process. In the meantime, he and Sarah met regularly, slowly building a tentative relationship as they waited for answers. James found himself marveling at the young woman Sarah had become. She was compassionate, intelligent, and fiercely determined, all qualities he recognized from the little girl he had known and loved. But there were moments, too, when he caught glimpses of the trauma she had endured. Sometimes, in the middle of a conversation, Sarah would suddenly go quiet, her eyes glazing over as if lost in a memory she couldn't quite grasp. It was during one of these moments, as they sat in James's study poring over old family albums, that Sarah suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her head. Sarah? James said urgently, moving to her side. What is it? Are you all right? Sarah's eyes were wide, unfocused, as if seeing something far away. The swing, she whispered. The red swing in the backyard. I remember falling off it. You were there. You picked me up and told me it was okay, that I was brave for not crying. James felt his heart skip a beat. He remembered that day clearly. Emily had been 6, determined to swing higher than ever before. When she had fallen, scraping her knees badly, he had been amazed at her stoicism. "That's right," he said softly, hardly daring to breathe. "That happened. Emily, you were always so brave." Sarah looked at him, her eyes clearing as she focused on his face. "It's real," she whispered. "It's all real. I'm Emily." The moment was shattered by the shrill ring of James's phone. He answered it, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "Mr. Thornton?" It was Maria, her voice tense. "We have a problem. The DNA results are in, and someone tried to intercept them. I think our investigation has been compromised." James felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you saying, Maria?" "I'm saying that whoever took Emily, whoever gave her the identity of Sarah Collier, they know we're onto them. And they're not going to let us expose their operation without a fight." As James hung up the phone, he looked at Sarah, at Emily, and saw the fear in her eyes. She had heard enough of the conversation to know something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What's happening?" James took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to say would change everything. "The people who took you," he said carefully, "the ones who gave you the identity of Sarah Collier, they know we're investigating. And they're not happy about it." Sarah's face paled, her hands beginning to shake. "What does that mean? Are we in danger?" James nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so. But I promise you, Emily, Sarah, I won't let anything happen to you. Not again. We're going to figure this out, and we're going to make sure these people can never hurt anyone else." As he looked at the young woman before him, his daughter, returned to him after so many years, James felt a fierce protectiveness surge through him. He had lost her once, he would not lose her again. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice small but determined. James squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Now, we fight back. We uncover the truth, no matter what it takes. And we make sure that the people who did this to you, to us, face justice." As they sat there, father and daughter reunited after 15 years of separation and lies, both James and Sarah knew that their lives would never be the same. The road ahead would be dangerous, filled with threats from shadowy figures who would stop at nothing to keep their secrets buried. But they also knew that they had found each other again, against all odds. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Across the city, in a nondescript office building, a group of men and women gathered around a conference table. Surveillance photos of James and Sarah were spread out before them, along with dossiers detailing their recent activities. "This is unacceptable," a stern-faced woman said, her voice cold. "Thornton was never supposed to find the girl. The programming should have held." A nervous-looking man cleared his throat. "It seems the emotional connection was stronger than we anticipated. The girl's true memories are starting to break through." The woman's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Then we have no choice. Initiate Protocol Omega. The girl must be reclaimed, and Thornton must be dealt with permanently." As the group nodded in agreement, setting in motion a plan that would bring chaos and danger to James and Sarah's doorstep, neither father nor daughter had any idea of the storm that was about to break over their heads. Back in James's study, Sarah, Emily, looked up at her father, a mixture of fear and determination in her eyes. "Dad," she said softly, testing out the word, "I'm scared. But I'm ready to know the truth. All of it." James pulled her into a tight embrace, his heart swelling with love and protectiveness. "We'll face it together," he promised. "Whatever comes, we'll face it as a family." As they held each other, both feeling the weight of the years they had lost and the challenges that lay ahead, neither James nor Sarah could have imagined the depths of the conspiracy they were about to uncover. A conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power and would shake the foundations of their world. The truth was coming, whether they were ready for it or not. And it would change everything. In the days that followed, James threw himself into the investigation with renewed vigor. He called in favors from old contacts, hired the best private security money could buy, and worked tirelessly to uncover every scrap of information about the organization that had taken Emily. Sarah, for her part, struggled to reconcile her two identities, the life she had known as Sarah Collier and the fragments of memory that were slowly returning to her as Emily Thornton. There were moments of joy, as she remembered happy times with her family, but also moments of terror as flashes of her abduction surfaced. It was during one of these moments, as Sarah sat curled up on the couch in James's study, that she suddenly sat bolt upright, her eyes wide with realization. "The woman," she gasped. "I remember the woman who took me. She said it was for my own good, that I was going to have a better life." James was at her side in an instant, his hand on her shoulder. "Can you describe her?" he asked gently. Sarah closed her eyes, concentrating. Blonde hair, cold blue eyes. She had a scar on her right hand, like a burn mark. And her voice, it was like ice. James felt a chill run down his spine. The description matched a woman he had seen at several charity events over the years. A woman who had always made him feel uneasy, though he had never known why. As he was about to share this information with Sarah, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Maria. "We've been compromised. Get out of the house now. They're coming for you both." James's blood ran cold. He grabbed Sarah's hand, pulling her to her feet. "We have to go," he said urgently. "Right now. I'll explain on the way." As they rushed out of the study, James could hear the sound of breaking glass from somewhere in the house. They were already here. "Emily," he said, using her true name in the heat of the moment, "whatever happens, know that I love you. And I will do everything in my power to keep you safe." Sarah, Emily, nodded, her eyes wide with fear but also a steely determination. "I love you too, Dad," she said. "We'll get through this. Together." As they made their way to the secret exit James had installed years ago, neither of them could have imagined the trials that lay ahead. The truth about Emily's abduction, the full scope of the organization behind it, and the shocking revelations that would shake their world to its core. It was all waiting for them, just beyond the shadows. The game was no longer just about uncovering the past. It had become a fight for survival, for justice, and for a future that had been stolen from them 15 years ago. As they slipped out into the night, leaving behind the life they had known, James and Emily Thornton took the first steps on a journey that would test their bond, challenge their beliefs, and ultimately, redefine what it meant to be a family. The truth was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would change everything. The cool night air hit James and Emily like a shock as they emerged from the secret tunnel into a deserted alleyway. The sounds of pursuit echoed faintly behind them, spurring them into action. James grabbed Emily's hand, and together they ran into the shadows of the city that had been their home for so long. "Where are we going?" Emily gasped as they ducked into a narrow side street. "I have a safe house," James replied, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "An apartment I bought years ago under a false name. No one knows about it except Maria." As they made their way through the labyrinth of city streets, Emily's mind raced. The memories that had been slowly trickling back over the past weeks now flooded her consciousness. Birthdays, family vacations, the sound of her mother's laugh. But with these happy memories came darker ones: the day of her abduction, the fear, the confusion, and the gradual erasure of her true self. They reached the safe house just as the first light of dawn began to break over the city skyline. It was a modest apartment, nothing like the luxurious mansion Emily had grown up in, but as James secured the multiple locks on the door, she felt safer than she had in years. "What now?" she asked, sinking onto a worn sofa. James ran a hand through his silver hair, his face etched with worry and determination. "Now, we fight back. We have evidence, Emily. With your recovered memories and the information Maria has gathered, we can expose this organization." Emily nodded, a steely resolve settling over her features. "I want to help. These people, they stole my life, Dad. They stole our family. I won't let them do it to anyone else." James felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. His daughter had grown into a strong, courageous woman, even through the trauma she had endured. But the thought of putting her in further danger made his heart clench. Before he could respond, his secure phone buzzed. A message from Maria. "Safe for now. Meeting arranged with FBI. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bringing key witness." James showed the message to Emily, whose eyes widened. "A key witness? Who could that be?" "I don't know," James admitted. "But if Maria thinks they're important, we need to trust her." The next morning dawned gray and misty, matching the tense atmosphere as James and Emily made their way to the designated meeting point, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Maria was already there, along with two stern-faced FBI agents and a nervous-looking woman Emily didn't recognize. As they approached, the woman's eyes locked onto Emily, filling with tears. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's really you." Emily felt a jolt of recognition, though she couldn't place where she knew this woman from. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The woman stepped forward, her hands shaking. "My name is Sarah Johnson. I was part of the organization that took you. I was your handler for the first year after your abduction." Emily recoiled, anger and fear surging through her. James moved protectively in front of his daughter, his eyes hard as he looked at Sarah. "Why are you here?" he demanded. Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "I'm here to make things right. I've been working with the FBI for the past year, gathering evidence, names, locations. I'm ready to testify against the entire organization." One of the FBI agents stepped forward, his face grim. "Ms. Johnson's testimony, combined with the evidence you've gathered and Emily's recovered memories, gives us what we need to bring down this trafficking ring. But it won't be easy. These people have connections in high places." James nodded, his jaw set. "We're prepared to do whatever it takes." Emily moved to stand beside her father, her hand slipping into his. "So am I," she said firmly. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of depositions, sworn statements, and tense meetings with prosecutors. Emily's recovered memories, combined with Sarah's insider knowledge and the mountain of evidence Maria had collected, painted a chilling picture of a vast conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of government and business. Children had been taken not just for adoption by wealthy families, but as pawns in a larger game of power and influence. Some had been groomed for positions of authority, their loyalty ensured by the organization that had saved them from their old lives. Others had been used as bargaining chips, their very existence leveraged for political and financial gain. As the case built, so did the danger. There were attempts on James and Emily's lives, narrow escapes that left them shaken but more determined than ever. The safe house became a fortress, with round-the-clock security provided by both private contractors and trusted FBI agents. Through it all, the bond between father and daughter grew stronger. Emily remembered more each day, not just the trauma of her abduction, but the happy times before, the love that had been stolen from her. And James, for his part, marveled at the strong, compassionate woman his little girl had become, even through the crucible of her experiences. Finally, after months of preparation, the day of the trial arrived. The courthouse was a fortress, with security tighter than for any mob boss or terrorist. As Emily took the stand, her eyes met her father's in the gallery, drawing strength from his unwavering support. "Miss Thornton," the prosecutor began, "can you tell the court about the day you were taken?" Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I was 8 years old," she began, her voice clear and strong. "It was a beautiful summer day. I was playing in our front yard when a car pulled up." As Emily recounted her abduction, the subsequent conditioning that had erased her memories, and her life as Sarah Collier, the courtroom was silent, hanging on her every word. James felt tears streaming down his face, reliving the pain of losing his daughter even as he celebrated her strength in facing her abusers. Sarah Johnson's testimony followed, laying bare the inner workings of the organization. Names were named, dates and locations provided. The web of conspiracy was revealed in all its horrifying detail. As the trial progressed, the true scope of the organization's reach became clear. Politicians, business leaders, even religious figures were implicated. The media frenzy was unprecedented, with headlines screaming about the scandal of the century. Through it all, James and Emily clung to each other, weathering the storm together. There were dark days, death threats, attempted bribes, smear campaigns in the press. But there were moments of light too, as other victims came forward, emboldened by Emily's courage. Families were reunited, long-buried truths brought to light. And slowly, painfully, a measure of justice began to take shape. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed. Emily sat beside her father, their hands clasped tightly as the jury foreman stood. On the charge of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, we find the defendants guilty. The litany of guilty verdicts continued, each one a balm to the wounds that had festered for so long. As the last judgment was read, Emily turned to her father, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." James pulled her into a fierce embrace, his own eyes wet with tears of joy and relief. "Yes, sweetheart," he murmured. "It's over. We won." In the days that followed, as the dust began to settle, James and Emily faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives. The media attention was intense, with requests for interviews and book deals pouring in from all corners. But for James and Emily, the most important work was happening quietly, away from the cameras and microphones. They were relearning how to be father and daughter, healing the wounds of their long separation. There were difficult moments, nights when Emily woke screaming from nightmares, days when the weight of all she had endured seemed too much to bear. But James was there through it all, his love and support unwavering. And Emily, for her part, helped her father heal as well. She listened as he spoke of the years of grief and searching, of the hole her absence had left in his life. Together, they visited Emily's mother's grave, sharing memories and shedding tears for the years that had been stolen from them. Slowly, tentatively, they began to look to the future. Emily, inspired by her own experiences and the courage of other survivors, decided to study law, determined to advocate for victims of trafficking and abuse. James, his passion for justice rekindled, refocused the Thornton Foundation on supporting survivors and funding research into trauma recovery. One crisp autumn morning, about a year after the trial, James and Emily stood together on the porch of their family home, the home Emily had been taken from so long ago. The tire swing still hung from the old oak tree, creaking gently in the breeze. "Are you ready?" James asked softly, squeezing his daughter's hand. Emily took a deep breath, looking out at the yard where she had played as a child, where her life had changed forever. "Yes," she said firmly. "I'm ready to come home." As they stepped over the threshold together, both felt the weight of the past lifting. The road ahead would not be easy. There were still challenges to face, wounds that would take time to fully heal. But they would face it all together, their bond stronger for having been tested by fire. The house that had stood empty for so long, a shrine to loss and grief, began to fill with new life. Laughter echoed through the halls, the smell of home-cooked meals wafted from the kitchen, and slowly, the Thornton family began to rebuild. Emily, once lost but now found, had returned not just to her home but to herself. And James, the father who had never given up hope, had received the miracle he had prayed for all those long years. As the sun set on that first day in their reclaimed home, James and Emily sat together on the porch swing, looking out at the world that seemed full of new possibilities. "Dad," Emily said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder, "thank you for never giving up on me." James pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his heart full to bursting. "I never could, sweetheart. You were always in my heart, always my little girl. And now we have our second chance," Emily finished, smiling up at him. As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, father and daughter sat in comfortable silence, grateful for the miracle of their reunion and hopeful for the future they would build together. The story of the millionaire who froze when he saw his daughter alive had captured the world's attention, shining a light on a dark conspiracy and bringing hope to countless families. But for James and Emily Thornton, the greatest story was the one they were just beginning to write. A story of healing, of redemption, and of a love that had proven stronger than time, distance, or the darkest of human cruelties. As they sat there, bathed in the soft glow of the porch light, both James and Emily knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, a family reunited, stronger than ever before.